Welcome to today's video. As you can see, it's a coastal scene with a few boats, some buildings in the background which is going to be fairly muted back, one or two people in it, and I think I'll do this in a fairly loose manner. I'm going to use my White Nights watercolour paints on this one, and the paper is Aldi's watercolour paper. It's 300 grams or £140. So I'll make a start as I normally do with the background sky. Now I'm not actually using a pre-wetting system here. It's going directly dry onto the paper, so it's very wet, juicy brush, and I'm going directly onto the dry paper. But because this paper, this cellulose paper, is it has a lot of sizing, it actually spreads quite easily. I'm using the back of this paper because the front has a very strange texture, but this has a reasonably smooth texture which you can work with nicely. I've just had a bit of grey toning in there to get some dark areas into the cloud in various areas, and we'll see how that goes. And now I'm blotting it out a bit with a bit of toilet paper just to give some highlights to the clouds and add a bit of interest of light there in various parts of the sky. And you can build this up as much as you want and work with it, although I don't want to be doing too much detail in a background thing like this. Once that's done, we'll let it dry a bit. I unfortunately lost a little bit of footage in this section, but what I'm doing now is getting some muted tones into the building. I don't want it to be overly strong because they are in the background, but I will apply some stronger colour a little bit later. I'm adding in like a mucky yellowy brown colour, but now I'm just going to put a little bit of colour into it to add that bit of punch to various bits of the buildings. And I'm not using the reference images colours. I wanted to create the colours out of my own mind in this particular situation, and try and make things a bit more interesting from the reference. As you can see at the moment, I'm just putting some duplicate colour in to the water, which is a reflection obviously, and we've got an harbour wall that I'm putting in. Most of these distant things are pretty simple brush strokes with light applications of muted colour and greys. And I'm now coming a bit closer to the area and adding some colours, and that's where I lost my footage, unfortunately. But as you can see, I'm starting now to add some more stronger vibrant colour, which would represent something that's in a much closer environment to you. The closer you get, the more strong and vibrant colour will be, and obviously there'll be more detail and more contrast in colour. So we got the yellow for the sand, and then we continued that on up into the hill and let that blend into the sap green. And now I've just applied some slightly stronger green, and we'll build that up bit by bit as we continue on with the painting at various different stages, adding more values in. And you can do that throughout the painting to give it that extra expression of texture and tonal value. And this is really what I'm doing at the moment. I'm finding out the areas that might potentially have areas that could be darker. I'm looking now at the only area of the actual water that has any blue in it, strangely. Just because it's water, it don't mean to say it's going to be blue. So that's the only bit there. Now the buildings have dried a bit, I'm going to go back and look at some areas that I want to have a bit more punch and colour in them. Although I will mute that back a bit and tone it down a little bit in various areas. This is really good because even though it's in the distance, it will still give it a sense of atmospherics and little bits of blends here and there, and it will contribute to that sense of depth. We'll just put in bits of very, very light colour in. It's mostly water, this, so when it does dry, it will be quite light. And again, duplicating in that water area where there's reflection, certain parts of it. And as we keep allowing the painting to dry for a bit, we can keep going back over it and then muting areas like I've just done there. And sometimes you need to knock it back a bit like what I've just done there, and eventually you'll get areas that have really interesting blends of tones in them, and you keep hacking away at these things and getting slowly but surely darker. So it is a very delicate, steady progress, this particular way of doing things. And I'm getting some shaded areas in, because I've not actually explained yet, but the light is coming from the top left hand side of our painting, so anything on the right hand side will lack light, therefore it'll be a bit darker. So I'm trying to get that idea into the painting and into that part of the building. So just to emphasise, the farther you go back, the more lack of colour there is. As you can see I'm doing there, it literally is like a wash of very grey. And when you put the strong colours in the more foreground buildings, that will help them to come forward a lot more. So what I'm doing now is just trying to carve out the potential areas of those buildings there, and bit by bit as they dry we can get areas that will represent one side or another side of the building itself, and making sure that anything that's towards the left side is obviously lighter than anything that will be on the right hand side, which is in the shade. And you can keep creating detail, but don't over detail this, because remember, it's a background thing, this. So one thing you must do is not over detail this area. A couple more bits here and there just to emphasise windows or doors or things like that, prominent things, and then we'll move on to somewhere else in the painting, such as this area of the banking, trying to carve out some of the darker areas of that, so that we can start looking at the foreground and seeing what's needed to be done there. As you can see, there's some people at the top of there, and I'm not going to be like trying to draw accurate things. They're in the distance. It's a very abstract set of blobs that. start looking also at potential shaded areas of the boat. The right hand side of the boat here, it will have shading there, and on the inside of the boat at the left side that will be shaded as well. So we're starting to carve the foreground out at this moment in time, strengthening that shaded area, and we'll do this several times. Another area that will need to have a shade is the people, and they've got a shaded area. There's a boat here as well that will use a shade, and all this is a dark brown that I'm using. And notice how that's now linking the boat, the people, and the boat in the foreground. Again, we need to just be patient and wait until things dry a little bit. And I'm gonna move back to the building and do some key details. And once we've done those details, we're really done with the building. But you may need to sometimes come back and do certain bits, as it may not be strong enough or dark enough or light enough. But there's a bit of building there that I forgot to put in, but we've sorted that out now. And again, it's carving out little areas that are key features that make it look like a building. Don't overdo the strength of the black though in this, although it's not black, it's a very dark brown. For these little fiddly areas, I've swapped over to a small filbert, quite an handy tool because it's got a very sharp edge for doing things like windows and doors and such like, but it has also got a very chisely kind of environment round it where you can do large areas, as I'm doing just there. So again, I'm picking out those key areas again in the building, and as I've said, it's something that you may need to do 2 or 3 times this, as you're building up layers. And if you've got a shadow in one area, if there's water next to it, that also needs to have a shadow, because it's a reflection obviously. And we've put in some details in that part of the building there. And again, try to be disciplined with this and not overdo the hyper detail of all of this work. Again, moving away from the background and coming more into the foreground, I'm applying some more fairly light green to the embankment to try and create texture that will link into the sandy area just in front of the beach, and help create the idea that it's rising up as well and it's going off into the distance. So I'm trying to link up that embankment to the sanded area, and we'll put some tones into the sand as well to create a little bit of texture. We can also put odd bits of detail leading off towards the people or a path or whatever that might be. And there they are, the little people. They're not massive detailed things, they're just a suggestion that there's people there. So we really don't need to be overboard about trying to paint them. They're literally very abstract things within the painting. And a couple of bits of detail again there. Bit of blending. It's always good to do a bit of blending of things. I've just applied neat water there so that I can activate the paper a bit and take a few bits out I know at this moment I'm going to blot it so it brings a bit of that light white area in, and it's all to do with texture, this really. There are several boats all moored together, and this is what we can do now. We've laid down some fairly muted colours, so we can make the boats now really strong coloured, and whatever colour you want to use. Boats are all sorts of different colours, so I'm literally just making these colours up as I go along. In the original painting they're fairly muted and white, and I just didn't want that, so I just wanted a blast of colour. But because they're against fairly muted background colours, they'll come out even more, which is a good thing. I'm starting to do this foreground boat, and again that were white, but I've decided to do it a dark blue colour, which I thought would be nice. So this is all about your own personal expression, the colours that you want to add in, not being dictated to by the reference or any other thing. I've nicked a little bit of paint out of that blue bit there because it were in the light, so it should be lighter. And again I'm continuing on with this idea of adding fairly vibrant colours into the more foreground areas. And with this boat, the closer you get, the more you want it to be vibrant and strong. But you can mute them back as you go farther back, which helps with that sense of depth. But the red boat I've just put in there also has a little bit of a reflection in the water as well, so take that into account. But when you're using red, obviously you've got to be very careful because it can be an extremely strong and vibrant colour. I'll just nip a little detailed line in of red into there, and that is basically that boat complete. We don't have to be doing tons of detail, we just need the essentials. And why not put a little bit of tonal value work in there as well, just to help put the painting in context with the rest of the artwork. We've done quite a bit of tonal work in the background. We're going to put a little bit of tone in the more foreground areas, although not as much. Now, don't be scared at this stage either to put dark areas in that boat there, and because I've already done the background, the boat just appears. And again, the dark side of that boat, it's just a couple of strokes. And in this one here, you'll see the side that doesn't have the light. Again, it's just a couple of dabs, and you're there, you've got the boat. So that's all it should be. And we're just picking out little areas that could do with a bit of shaping. I'm just going to re-emphasise that red area in the reflection, avoiding that area just underneath it, which is some sort of mast that I want to keep clear. I'm looking at the bottom left corner here, and it's looking a bit too white, so I'm going to knock it back a bit with a little bit of greyy yellow, just to push it back a little bit, because it was too strong and white. So I'm letting the water light blend a little bit, and that's helped it just that tiny little bit. And it's amazing how little you need to do to make that right. Stepping away from the boat swim a bit, I'm going to be doing a little bit more modelling and texturing to emphasise the ill again, and the connection between the grass area and the sanded area. And while I'm doing that, and I've got some dark colouring, I'm starting to define the boat, which this boat is white, but obviously because it's facing partly to the sun and partly not, you've got a shadow, a mid area and a very light area, which I'm trying to blend into the background now. For a sense of scale, I added a couple of foreground people, so let's do that now. I'm putting some muted red in for the head and a little bit more, and I'm then going to there's the hands, because I think they're holding hands, these two, and I will start putting the body colour in. And it's always nice to see these kind of all blended in, the colours. I like to see it like that anyway. So we'll proceed with caution with this one. So it's like a yellow ochre that I'm doing there, and maybe the trousers will be a completely different colour. Maybe they'll be blue or something, but to some degree that will bleed into the yellow and make an overall set of colours for me. And again, I'm going to make a slightly darker colour for the trousers on this one. So I've not done anything major with that. It's not a big deal, but it's just a nice emphasis in a particular place in the picture, and it gives that human interaction. Now I'm sorry, my computer cursor decided that it wanted to make an appearance in the painting, although it's not distracting too much from the viewing of what we're doing here. So again, I'm carving out more of these dark areas to create that three-dimensional feel, and I'll do this to all the areas that I've created shading, and hopefully we can get this all really linked up, and some of that shading will go on the boat at the correct side. And I'm back using my quill brush, using a dark brown with a very light wash of water. I'm going to put some texture into this area. I don't want to overdo that because it's not a key component of the painting. As it's drying, we'll keep working on that smooth transition from the sand to the ridged area, and also getting some more darker areas into some of the areas of the boat. Very daringly I used that brush to do my masts, but really what you should do is use a rigger brush. I mean, I made it really hard for myself doing this because it's a fairly thick brush, but you will see me using the rigger brush in a bit. But I'm kind of blacking out certain areas that I want to have strong dark values in now, and we're starting to get detail into the areas of the mid part of the painting. We'll continue detailing this part of the painting and adding darker tones to help create that three-dimensional space, and linking various other parts of the painting, because it is really important that we get the painting to link together instead of looking like completely separate things. And again, we're working on this more foreground boat and picking out details. Don't be over precious about putting too much detail in, and I'm just looking for blobs and areas that will benefit from it having a bit of dark area in it. And as a contrast, there are areas that you might want to redo light, and that's an example of one there. There's a bit of a boat there, although it does look a bit of a mishmash that in that area, because there's so many boats it's difficult to tell which bit of the boat's what. So now we are starting to get to the detailed points, because I'm using my rigger brush now, and that is for getting some very fine lines. It's a long thin brush, you can put loads of paint in it and it can work for a long time without being refilled. And what I'm using that for really is getting like windows and extra dark areas underneath the roofs and things like that, and it will be the final part to the building really. And there we go, that's one of the reasons why you have a rigger, for doing masts on boats. That's what they were originally made for, rigger brushes. And also sign writers use a similar kind of brush. So I've reloaded with some more dark brown, and it's important that it's dark brown and not black, because the black can actually really dull off the painting. And I'm again going round areas that I think will benefit from a little bit of working out, and so that there's a little bit more definition, as that building is a lot more in the foreground than what some of the other buildings are. It ought to have a tiny bit more detail, and try and keep that consistent as well throughout your painting. The closer you get, the more detailed you get, the more colour, the more tonal value, contrast, the closer you are. And I can start putting other bits. It's going from the mast, that there, and there's another line, and you don't have to do this all in one perfect line. You can do it broken up, it looks fine that. And little bits of detailing on the boat, but we're not really that far away from the end of it. Again, it's more to do with detailing now. I'm trying to get a dark side to both of these people's face, but literally it's just little bits of dotting and dabbing now. I'm just going to strengthen up the shadow on this particular area, and again connect it in, which gives it a sense of distance and a good positioning. But really we're not that far off the edge. A bit more texture there, just to lead your eye into the painting, and I think not too much, but maybe a little sprig of grass showing there, detailing, but don't go over the top, because it's a loose painting, and we don't want too much heavy detail in it. It would spoil the overall painting. And again, a teeny bit of tonal work there, and we are coming to the end of the painting. Right, here's the end painting. Obviously I started with the sky, got that done. I wanted to keep the buildings in the background fairly muted because the main part of the painting is round here with your various bits of boats, and it's splashes of colour round muted areas of grey and brown, and it really makes the boats then come forward a lot more. And obviously we've got this boat here that helps link into these people that then links into there, so we've got a kind of link with everything. And we've got this bank in here. I didn't want to put too much detail in, although we have got some people there. And the foreground finishing touches just to make sure that you know that that's fairly close. And that's your painting done. And it was done on some Aldi's watercolour paper, and I'm quite surprised that it's worked as well as it has, because normally cheap paper's fairly poor. Although this is the back side of the paper. If you look at the front, it's quite heavily textured, but I've used the back side of this paper this time round. So this has been my video. I hope you've enjoyed it and got something from it, and we'll see you in my next video. Bye all.